Stef, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great being here, yeah.
You're the co-founder and CEO at Cradle, a company which helps biologists to design improved proteins in record time using the powerful generative AI.
Yes.
We will talk about that, but before
What the heck is that? Yeah.
you studied industrial engineering at university, and at some point you thought, well, why not also study some philosophy as well, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I really took my time and enjoyed college as much as I could. So to your point, my primary program was industrial engineering. In the Netherlands, studying is effectively free. And so
it's dangerous.
It's very dangerous. Yeah, you got to do all kinds of cool things that you like doing as well. So I started a bachelor's program. I didn't finish it. For two reasons. One, the Dutch government decided second studies were not free anymore. And so then it was, I think I had to pay like $10,000 or something, or euros, to have the second one, which I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to be a philosophy teacher. That said, I do think sort of learning about ethics, learning about history of technology, sort of learning about philosophy more generally, I think it gives you a nice perspective on how to think about problems and how to introspect, which I think was very helpful because, engineering schools can be a little bit, I had I think a math teacher who at some point said something along the lines of, welcome to maths and natural sciences. Everything else is poetry. What we do here is real science, right? And so I think it was a good way of getting out of the, more exact side of the house for a little while. Yeah.
A great balance, so to speak.
I would agree, yes.
But then after your education, you actually became a policy advisor at the European Parliament.
Correct.
You also started the Open State Foundation. So I wonder, did you have any aspirations to go into politics yourself?
Yes. So I think in college, I really thought sort of civil society activities, politics, those were the ways to sort of change society. So to your point, Open State Foundation was an organization that was really dedicated to government transparency, but also to open data. And so government transparency was more around things like, what is the government spending money on? How are they voting, right? That kind of stuff. We actually won a Time Magazine Best Website of 2012 award for a very quirky little website called Polytwoops, where we would revive deleted tweets of politicians, which is freaking hilarious and got quoted a lot by media. And then, the other bit was open data. So at the time, a lot of government IT systems were pretty much closed. You might remember a day where you couldn't get public transit information in apps, which was kind of annoying.
Yep.
And so we organized hackathons and sort of all kinds of other activities to see if we could free up some of that information. I still remember getting Tramline 5 in Amsterdam as a secret data feed because they were super scared about all kinds of risk. And then I met Marietje Schaake, who used to be a member of parliament in the EU, and I really thought, hey, we need more engineers there. I also realized after, I think, about a year working for her that I wasn't a very good politician. And so I became a software engineer at Google, as retired politicians sometimes do. Yes.
That's quite a shift. You spent then 7 years at Google, and I wonder, how did that shape you as a person? Because from philosophy to politics to Google, that's multiple shifts.
I'm a little T-shaped, I think. I get excited about things that I don't know a lot about fast. Yeah. I mean, so at the time, for me, Silicon Valley was really, really a lure. Tech was still cool. These companies were relatively small. They were launching sort of stuff left and right. And I really felt like, especially I was in the Netherlands at the time, there was just not a lot of interesting employers. You could work for, I don't know, some strategy consultant or something, but I was like, meh.
Maybe not.
No. And then I was like, do I want to be an entrepreneur? I think yes, but I also felt like I know nothing, right? I'm not very good at this stuff. I don't know how to build good products. And so I think joining Google was really, really helpful. You learn a lot of things. So, just practically, I think, especially at the time, Google's engineering workforce was very high quality, and sort of you learn how to write good software that scales very well. And that was all quite new at the time, right? When I remember when I interned for the first time there, sort of being able to start 40,000 machines. There's one of the few places in the world where you could do that, right? Now, today, you just need a credit card to do that. And so, and then, you learn about the culture of Silicon Valley, which is very different from, the Netherlands or Switzerland, if you will. It's more risk-taking. Americans are sort of, especially in technology, sort of definite optimists, right? They'll try weird stuff. I would say Do you think Europeans would invest in rockets doing backflips in the atmosphere? I don't think so, or at least we've stopped doing that. There is a certain ability to scale these companies a lot faster in the U.S. So venture capitalists are just a lot more excited about trying things out. They're less focused on risk, if you will. I think there's a lot of high density of talent, which, especially for me, I'm not the smartest guy by any stretch of the imagination in sort of that, in my teams that I worked in, I was not the best engineer. But it's really good to play with A players, right? You just learn a lot from them. Spend a bunch of time there and at some point decided I want to go back to Europe during the last presidential election in the US. That's been great because I think you can sort of combine the best of both worlds, have the network, the experience of Silicon Valley, but, the more level-headedness of Europe. The Swiss engineers are great. They will actually build it if you ask them instead of maybe build it and have lots of slideware around it.
Fair point.
So I think the sort of my allegiance is a little bit in the middle right now. Yeah,
sounds great. And then in 2021, you actually decided to start your own company, Cradle. Tell me a bit more about where did you find the right problem to solve and how did this whole idea around Cradle emerge?
Yeah, sure. So in my last job at Google, I was on the product leadership team of Google Research and Machine Intelligence. And I focused mostly on our hardware. So, both the physical hardware as well as the software and infrastructure software to run and train machine learning models. So, you may have heard of the TPU program, which is sort of specific hardware, but also sort of all the NVIDIA chips. When you're designing machine learning hardware, you need to learn about what people are going to run 2 to 3 years from now, because that's just the nature of making silicon. And so one of the cool parts of my job was I got to go into the very deep depths of Google Research and be like, so what are you working on, right? And be like, is it very different from the other things that we are serving at a reasonable scale right now? And so, I got to meet several teams and 2 in particular that were working in biology. One was the AlphaFold team that were at DeepMind. They're famous for solving the problem of protein folding, which is effectively what does it look like, right? If you see it in 3D. But there was another team that was sort of doing the generative version of it. They were like, hey, could we, like how ChatGPT answers a question, or how some coding copilot can make a piece of code, could you sort of turn this around and actually make a protein or make some piece of biology? And so I spoke to my now co-founder, Eli, and he explained this to me of like, hey, it would be awfully cool if we could program organic chemistry the same way that we can program computers. And that was like, holy shit.
Crazy.
Right? That's like insane, right?
Yeah.
I started sort of reading up and looking into the problem, and it's kind of interesting because similar to how we train human language models or coding models, they all sort of read a set of characters and then, try to do a bunch of tricks in order to figure out how it works. And I think with DNA, it's kind of the same thing, it turns out. Now, this was a more adventurous venture, I would say.
I'm not surprised.
I remember, I think it was Index who did some due diligence, and they had called some large Dutch chemical company, and they asked like, hey, these guys want to do this thing. What do you think? And I think the direct response, like, these guys are smoking crack. This is impossible.
But that's part of doing something new, right?
Yes. So we had basically investors saying, what even is this, right? We were pre-ChatGPT, so the whole notion of like language models for biology, I think it's much easier to pitch these days. Plus customers saying this is never going to work was somewhat tricky. But, forward almost 4 years now, and it works at scale, which is kind of cool. So I'm excited. I still think I'm still in my sort of honeymoon phase with biology, because at the limit, all the things we can do with biology are just so much more than, really most of the stuff that we're seeing with tech these days is coming out of online advertising, which is a relatively small market. I think a very senior guy at one of the pharma companies we work with is, as soon as you pop your first pharma pill or a cancer pill, you've basically paid for all your ads in your life. Right?
Fair enough. Yeah. And tell us a bit more about, the biology behind it. Like, people who are not that well read or well known about biology, explain that to me like I'm 5. Why do biologists design proteins, and why are they so important?
Of course, yeah. Let me maybe first do the very brief, because it's obviously expert software, the very brief biology from high school that you probably forgot, and then what people are making with it. So you have a cell. Inside of your cell, there's a little bit of DNA. DNA gets executed, and then what it gets expressed, so what the cell makes is proteins. Proteins are little machines. They're like parts of the cell, like the cell wall, and they basically assemble into this more complicated thing. Proteins can do lots of things. So, for example, you might enjoy beer. Proteins in fermenters turn sugar into alcohol, right? So they can, catalyze certain chemical reactions. They can be materials like, collagen in beauty products, or they can be, cloth and other things, right? And so the product that we've made is effectively Photoshop for these proteins. So instead of like generating a picture, we can generate a sequence that encodes for this protein, right? That encodes for this little molecular machine. Okay, so what products are being made? It's actually quite vast already. And so about 60% of pharmaceutical products are proteins. So if you've had a COVID vaccine of certain vendors, actually of all the vendors, they were proteins of some sort, or they would encode for a protein. In the case of the COVID vaccine, if you had the Moderna vaccine, it literally, there was a little piece of RNA, so sort of executable code that was inserted in your bloodstream. A cell would eat it and be like, oh, look, here's this thing I can make, like run the executable, and then you got the little spike, like the little point that the corona uses to get into the cell. That was made inside of your own cell by you, right? And then the cell's like, what the fuck is this, right? This is not native to me. It throws it into the bloodstream. The immune system is like, what the fuck is this? Starts beating it up. Next time, dude with a hat, with a point on it shows up, you have immunity. That's how immunity gets built with these vaccines. Anyway, these products need to be engineered. Now, the problem is you write a protein in 20 letters. So actually the 4 amino acids that you've learned in school, they translate into, or the 4 letters translate into 20 amino acids. And so we have, the problem is we can't read DNA as humans, right? So where we can read human text, we can kind of read code, right? We can't read DNA. If we could, that'd be awesome, but it's really hard. And so really what we're trying to do with Cradle is, can we learn what is sort of encoded in that alien programming language? And then once we learn it, can we flip it around so that people can engineer these products? And so that's the TLDR of it. And so it's being used by research and development organizations across, pharmaceuticals, materials, food, all products effectively where there's some sort of biology that could be involved. And the reason why it's helpful for them is it's very expensive to make these products, because today, engineering a bio-based product or a protein-based product is effectively like, we sort of like found a hard drive with shit tons of executables, but we don't know, we just see binary. And so people are like flipping bits, and then running your compiler, like trying out whether it works, takes like 8 weeks. Oh. And this is why making a drug takes forever and is very expensive, right? So if you can make the design part a lot more accessible, they can get to places a lot faster. And so what we're seeing with Cradle is, about 2 to 12 times speed ups in these R&D programs. And some of these R&D programs cost like tens of millions of dollars a year, right?
So the business value that you generate for these companies, that's immense.
Yes.
Wow. Crazy.
Yes, we did not. I mean, it was a risky thing to try, but it's kind of cool that it worked. Yeah.
It's fantastic. You also mentioned co-founders. The interesting thing about your setup is that usually you find 1 or 2 co-founders, but I think you found 4.
Yes.
This is crazy. Where did you find them, and why is 4 co-founders the right setup for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. So I knew this was going to be hard, and I also knew there was a lot of stuff I didn't understand about the problem. And I think, a lot of good companies are built out of groups of people that are highly talented in a specific area and can execute really well. Now, let's say language model bit, I had at least grasp of through my background at Google. But, how do you build language models for biology? No. So I needed Eli on the bio side, or on the model side. Then, how do you test whether a generative model in biology works? Well, you have to run experiments, right? So you have to go into a laboratory, and it's like, I don't know how to build a laboratory, right? So Harman and Elisa came, who were also both in the Bay Area at the time, working for different biotech companies. And then I was like, well, I've been a plumber for a large part of my life, right, in my career, right? So when I was at Google, it was infrastructure and infrastructure software and developer tools, right? Before that was Android, which is also like nobody like looks at their tablets like, I love the operating system. They're all like Spotify, and so the real heroes are the people that make the apps. So, and I'm fine being a plumber, but it's really like what we're seeing with ML right now. Where in the early days of TensorFlow, which is software people use to make a machine learning model, people are like, why the heck would you do that? Because there's not very many people that are doing it. Well, because you can start adding cognition to software applications. I think very similarly, if we make it super easy and cheap to engineer biology, you're going to get a lot of very smart biologists making really cool products.
I love that. So it makes sense. You'll bring like a very specific skill set to the table. Nevertheless, I wonder, was it difficult for you to also build credibility with PhDs and biologists? Because they say, well, you're this infrastructure guy, right?
Oh, yes.
How should we trust you, or how can you even be beneficial for us to over-exaggerate?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. So I knew the techies pretty well. So Jelle on the design side, because we wanted to build good software, and he was the first employee at Uber. He built the Amsterdam office for them. Him I knew because we had tried to hire each other several times being Dutchies, and we sort of always had like, at some point it's going to work. We're going to do something together. Yeah. Then Eli I knew from the Bay Area, but I didn't know any biologists. And so, as part of sort of preparing to start Cradle, we interviewed about 100 scientists just to learn about their problems, right? I think any good product person can learn a new space, but you just have to put in the effort. And I think most entrepreneurs and product people don't do that. They're a solution in search of a problem, not the other way around, right? Anyway, so I met a few folks like Elisa and Herman, and apparently Elisa, as a biologist, PhD, picked up or got an email from a friend. She's like, oh, this guy from Google wants to talk to you. And apparently her first response was like, oh, another tech bro, right, that thinks biology is easy. And so there was a lot of like building of credibility, but I think once we spend a couple of days together learning about the problems that she had and some of the technological solutions that were out there, at least for human language at the time, I think both of them got convinced that this was something at least worthwhile trying. Then all of us also wanted to go back to Europe, and we clearly didn't want to go work for existing incumbent large, biotech or pharma companies because they're all a bit slower, I would say.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I do have a very stupid question, probably. But from the outside perspective, many people, they use Gemini or ChatGPT, etc. Why is an existing model like that not being able to do what you do with Cradle? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So a human language model, let's go into how they're trained and sort of the very, very butchered summary of what, let's say, OpenAI and others do. So you download the internet and you go and try to make the model understand what word should go where. And so you take all the sentences and you start randomly removing words, right? We're on the Bleep podcast. And if it's like Swiss entrepreneur, it's like, yeah, you get points, right? The problem then is, and so you can remove ever more words. And at some point you can sort of understand that you can get from, let's say, one language to another or a question to an answer. Then the real cool trick from OpenAI was, can we reinforce the right answer, right? So reinforcement learning with human feedback. And so they have raters, they have people that will get like, here's a question, here's a bunch of answers. What's the most relevant or likely answer?
Right.
And so you add human preference to this. The problem here still is it's trained on text, right? It's trained on things humans can read, can introspect, and that kind of stuff. All right, now let's get to biology. In biology, we have DNA. Nobody can read DNA. Right, so you can't just give it to a rater and be like, better DNA? Because they're going to be like, I don't know, right? Okay. Even the smartest people have real trouble doing that because biologists have like super deep knowledge of a very specific system or protein, and they know that really intimately, but they can't just go somewhere else, right? And so the first problem that we can do the first thing, which is, hey, we can measure, we can remove, let's say, amino acids and be like, what goes here, and then if it does it correctly, then it gets points. The problem then is what biologists want from these models isn't encapsulated anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to actually go collect data in order to do that. Similarly to how there isn't sort of a shit ton of self-driving car video footage laying around on the internet, like Waymo had to go produce that, right? Tesla had to go produce that. So for us, similarly, the things that people might want from a molecule might be like, does it catalyze a reaction? Does it bind to something? Is it sort of stable at room temperature or a higher temperature? So you need to do measurements, very specific measurements. And so this is one of the things that we're doing in our lab to sort of then allow scientists to prompt, I want a molecule that does this, or is stable at this room temperature, or a lot of it gets made in the cell, or not a lot of it gets made in the cell. So they can sort of, let's say, describe the problem in language they understand. And so for us, it's much more a translation problem almost than a retrieval problem, right? A lot of what ChatGPT is doing is summarization still, right? It's very smart summarization, but it's really hard for it. It hasn't sort of called someone and be like, oh my God, there's gravity. I looked at all the YouTube videos, right? That's super cool. I did some, right? It doesn't do that by itself. So, or, you know, I was interested in sort of how good vision models were, and I gave it my 5-year-old sort of geometry homework where she had to like look at sort of, oh, there's like a circle with a bar, count the number of intersections. It completely falls on its ass. Why? Because it's not in the training set, right? So anyway, so it's a different problem. And so our models are built from the ground up. They're trained on different data than, let's say, a human language model. Human language models are relevant in summarizing academic literature. So it might help scientists understand why a certain change that our model makes might impact a certain biological system because there was previous knowledge somewhere in a paper, right?
But then in that sense, if I understand you correctly, it is really a data set problem. You basically have to generate a vast amount of data to then train your model and be able to actually deliver the value that you are offering.
Yes, so there's a data problem and there's a coverage problem. So data is one, and we talked about it. Coverage is if you download all sentences from the internet that you can have access to, you have a pretty good coverage of things people might say. The problem with biology is that we've only sequenced something to the 0.0000000 something. And then a measurement, like a label, costs, you know, between $100 and a few $1,000. And so a measurement is incredibly expensive. And so that means where, you know, where for human language, the data that you can collect is like a nice full Gouda cheese, right? In biology, it's effectively a big whole Swiss cheese, right? And so interpolation between places is much harder in biology. And that means that the training routine, so like hallucinations in bio models are way more common than in human language models. So quality and the teacher and how do you train these models is a lot more relevant than I can just throw more data at it, which has been sort of the trick of most of Silicon Valley for the last couple of years. We cannot just throw more data at it, right? If we need to sample, you know, if we need to run experiments on billions of sequences that all cost a few $100, that is just not a viable thing to do.
Yeah, right. It sounds like an incredibly hard problem that you're solving right there, like insanely hard.
It's a fun problem, yeah, for sure. Yes.
Fun, but also very big and very challenging. Nevertheless, you have one very reputable, well-known customers like Novo Nordisk, for example.
Yes.
Take us back to the first customers. How did you approach them? How did you win them and also convince them to work with you when probably everyone in the industry said, you guys are smoking crack, this will never work?
No, the early days were the hardest. So we didn't have the public evidence of like language models, so there were no analogies that were easy for people to grasp. Our models were very, let's say, incapable still in the early days, right? They weren't fully featured. And so that was really hard. Our first customers, so the way that we built the company, and this might be helpful for other founders that are trying to solve harder problems, right? So the first thing that we wanted to prove was the feasibility hypothesis. Like, can we even do this? There, it's typically helpful to start with eval. Like, can you compare it to something that they're already doing? And can you at least show on the computer that it works better? And so in our case, this was molecular dynamics simulations of, you know, when do molecules fall apart? And we were like, okay, that's something that's trusted as a tool. Can we show that we can outperform that? That, you know, after a whole bunch of model building and yada, yada, I think it took us like a year and a half or something, that worked. Then we wanted to show that in a laboratory because they're scientists and they're trained to be very skeptical. And so they're like, well, I mean, it works on your computer or whatever, right? Like, show me in the lab, right? So we had to show it in the lab. Anyway, that showed it was feasible and that it was at or exceeding human capabilities for that specific problem. That wasn't general enough, right? That would still be like Photoshop with like only the line tool, which was, you know, it's not great if Photoshop only does that.
It's a small proof.
But it was a starting point, right? And so then we tried to find customers that had that problem, and initially were like, oh, we want them to pay for it, but they didn't want to pay for it because they, to your point, said, this is bullshit. This is never going to work. But also the opportunity cost for a lot of our customers is quite large. And so let me try to explain that. So if you build a bio-based product, you're effectively going through these 8 to 12 week cycles where you like design a bunch of new sequences. Mm-hmm. You go order DNA, you go make the protein, and then you go test them on a whole bunch of properties or experiments that you care about. That process is very expensive, right? So what we were asking customers was quite benevolent. We were like, oh, our thing will like design all the stuff that goes into your experiments. And oh, by the way, could you just light $500,000 on fire and maybe put your project sort of 3 months behind if this doesn't work, right? And we had no proof other than what we had talked about. And so the second one was, can we get to that value hypothesis without monetization? And so I actually paid them. So we took some of our money and we said, okay, if we buy some additional reagents, can you just double your throughput, your experimental throughput? We'll pay for all the stuff, but we'll show you it's better, right? And you need to commit to a case study so we can show other people this actually works. Of course. So we did that with 2 customers. They didn't pay. We paid them. And then that, that worked. That was a big moment. The day that data came back, I didn't sleep. Right? I was like, oh my God, if this is just like, you can't do that too long. At some point, you're just going to run out of VC money, right? Of course, yeah. And so, but it worked, which is super nice. And so at that point, I think that was really a turning point for the company where we could go to other customers and be like, look, we can save you. Because like the flip side of this being very expensive for them to do is your impact size is very meaningful once you flip that around, right? And so that was really when we could start building a software product around it, because this was still Wizard of Oz. It was like an upload form. Right. And then there was like engineers behind it that were like, all right, let's go do some stuff. Yeah. It took us about, I think 2.5 years, like March of last year is when we started selling for reals. And sort of we've been scaling since then. And it's been quite amazing. So from, I think, maybe 5-ish, end of last year, we're now projecting to be at around 40 molecules by the end of this year, which is kind of insane. To give you a sense, a large pharma company might have 30 to 40-ish in total for that entire pharma company. And some of these companies spend billions of dollars in preclinical research, right? So, so I'm excited. We're now in that sort of scaling phase, a whole bunch of other different problems. But yeah, I do think feasibility, value, and monetization have been demonstrated at this point, and so it's really about scaling now. Yeah,
that's amazing, and it sounds a bit like a counterintuitive story, because most of the time, you hear people say, "Okay, you have to go there, test, but people have to pay you." That's the proof, right? You did the other thing. You paid your customers. What gave you the conviction that this was necessary and the right thing to do? Because others might have just said, it's not working, they are not paying for it, we have to move on and try something else.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I do think people are, people do think in first principles once they see something. I do also think, especially more incumbent industries are very risk averse by default. No. If you can raise the money, like get to that value proof fast, right? And I think a lot of people will drive on vanity metrics, and ultimately revenue is a vanity metric, right? You're not actually solving a problem with revenue. People pay you if you solve a problem for them. So don't put the cart before the horse. Show the value first and be very clear about what that means. For us, that meant getting to a better quality molecule with less money. Yep. And we can measure these things. We're not a vitamin, we're a painkiller, right? And so what gave me that conviction? I don't know. Maybe this is where entrepreneurship sort of kicks in, and you just have to try it. I do think maybe having been in Silicon Valley for a long time, I wasn't very worried about failing. Mm-hmm. I was like, venture capital is just somebody paying for you to try out a project. They know the risk, right? If you're honest about the risk and you tell them how you're going to approach the problem, they're typically quite okay with that. If the prize is large enough, and the prize is huge in this case, right? So Yeah, no, and I could have been, I don't know, spending time at some random strategy consultant for 2 years, probably not worth it, right?
Fully agree. Yeah, and it worked. That's the crazy part.
And it worked. I mean, it could have totally not worked, right? So,
Exactly.
but yeah, it did. Yes.
And what was the conversation with the investors back then? Because very early, you didn't have the traction, basically. I mean, of course, you showed the little proof, but it was basically a big, big bet, right? So how did you have these conversations with investors and told them, we're going to take this bet, we're going to pay them, they're not paying us, we're going to pay them, so we use your money to pay them for a pilot in the case
Although we
study.
had hoped they were going to pay us to be, that was hindsight 2020, yeah.
But I just wonder, what was the conversation with the VCs? Because many VCs, they also say, well, we want to see traction, then we're going to invest and double down.
For sure.
You have this chicken and egg problem. You need money to prove it, but you don't have proof yet. So how do you get the money?
And honestly, I do think this is where we as a team were actually privileged. So most of my VC contacts were absolutely not in Europe. I speak to one Swiss VC who I still like. I think they rebranded from Wingman to Founderful. They're awesome.
Big shout out. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But I avoided Dutch VCs. We just didn't speak to them. And so the nice thing about VCs in the US is that they're willing to take bets, and they're willing to take more risky bets, and they've demonstrated that more risky bets pay off more. Again, we were privileged. So, we had the first employee at Uber. We had people running large teams at Google Research. We had folks running large departments at biotech companies. If you take my CTO, Daniel, he was one of the first 7 people to build Google Zurich here, and he built the Chromecast. And so I do think they were willing to take a team bet to some extent. And then I do think working with A-class VCs helps a lot. A lot of Europeans are, I would say, Excel knights, right? It's exactly what you were saying. They'll be there. You're like, oh, you just started with your team. Show me that you have 5 million in revenue. That's not how this fucking thing works, right? Like, it's called venture capital. It's not called early private equity, right? Yeah. You have to go on an adventure, and you have to build a portfolio of more risky and less risky bits. That's your job, right? Don't put that on the entrepreneur, right? Yeah. And so agree. Don't work with the idiots. That's the TLDR. Yeah. Find good angels. There's increasingly good people that are willing to fund your very earliest pre-seed check. We did that as well. And that builds commitment. It also builds commitment from larger funds, right? If you, for example, we had a couple of folks like, my former boss at Google, Jeff Dean, right? Like, that's awesome. If you have folks like that coming on board, it signals to VCs that you're credible, right? Right. Similarly, here in Zurich, there's a ton of good founders now that were from generation 1. If you get to raise some money from them, that's a massive signal to VCs. Because honestly, the only thing you can do really is, does this market exist? That's something you can ask yourself. And then, do I trust this team? But everything else is we're going to find it out because we don't know, right? And we shouldn't pretend we do. Right?
Fully agree. Yeah. And you mentioned this importance, right, of getting the right people on board. How much money did you actually need to then get to this proof point where you had, okay, now we have a case study and it actually works? How much money did you need to get to that point?
Yeah, we raised 5, a little over 5, with a little bit of angel money as well. That was mostly because experiments are expensive. We could have probably built the software with fewer people, but yeah, we started 5 on 25, I think, and then our A was 25, and then our B was 70-ish.
Yeah, you raised more than 100 million by now.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yes, it's happening. Yeah.
And you also won some of the best investors. I think Index Ventures, it's probably arguably the best investor here in Europe, right?
I would agree. Yeah, I think both Index and don't underestimate IVP. They're in the US. They're one of the best grossing VCs in terms of return profiles. They're less markety as maybe an Andreessen Horowitz or perhaps a Sequoia, although Sequoia is a very, very unique firm. But still, they're all credible people that have a very long history of backing outliers. Right?
How did you then convince them to join your journey? Because you probably had a big, success with the case study, with the pilot. The market is huge. What was that conversation like once you had some traction?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of 2 parts to this, right? There's just the standard part that you'll always have to do. You have to pitch, have to show them the vision, show them the team, show them what the product is, show them why it makes sense, right? So, and that is a very obvious thing with us, fortunately. So a lot of the risk for us is sort of, there's, and they think in risk, right? So there's science risk, there's team risk, there's market risk, there's monetization risk. if you can show them the little boxes as much as possible and then show them a credible plan to prove that as fast as possible, I think most people will back you, right? And so VCs aren't sort of magical beings. And a lot of people talk about, it's really hard to raise money. And then you really should ask yourself, maybe you're doing something wrong, right? And sure, there are very big exceptions here. If you're a woman or a person of color, there's absolutely biases in this industry. But if you can come up with a good story and it makes sense, they will back you, right? Yeah. And so I think for us, this was the same thing. We told them, here are the risks. This is how we're going to figure out whether they work or not. Do you want to back this or not? And it also makes it less of I don't know. I would say there's this weird dance founders sometimes do, right? So I've been very honest with people. Similarly, in how I raise money, I built relationships with a very limited set of firms, and I just tell them what we're doing, and I show them our results. And then, you could be wrong, but the whole point is, if you realize after 2 years it was the wrong thing, you just give the money back, or at least whatever is left, and then you tell them this didn't work. These things I can't prove. I'm very sorry. I'm going to try something else again.
Absolutely.
And they'll back you, right? Yeah. But you need to be honest, right?
Yeah. I love the Dutch mentality there. I did my exchange semester in Rotterdam.
Yeah, yes.
And I first I was shocked, the Dutch people are so direct, like no bullshit, no fluff, just straight to the point.
We're a bit like pirates, yes.
But I love that because that's exactly the mentality that helped me now to convince the investors and show them very honest, this is where we stand, this is what I know, this is what I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And be systematic about it. You need to move with urgency. You need to have a little bit of a track record, of course, but it is very possible in Europe to raise good money from good VCs if you focus on the right thing. A lot of the problems in Europe, start to emerge when you raise from some idiot in your seed round, and now suddenly you lost such a massive part of your cap table that any later stage investor just can't make money, and then they don't, right? It's not because of your team. It might not even be because of your product. But it's just basically you're screwed from day one. There's just a lot of interesting dynamics in the local ecosystem that just make it hard for people. And it's what I said earlier. I think we've been a very privileged team. We're not a European company. We're American. We're like all American raised founders that decided to move back and start a company here. I've never worked for a European company in my life, right?
It's crazy.
Never interacted with most European VCs in terms of taking fundraising seriously. Yeah. So we're more tourists than locals, unfortunately. Yeah.
But nevertheless, if you look at your LinkedIn profile, you're very vocal and bullish about Europe, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think if I look at Google research, it was maybe a third Asians and a third Europeans at a minimum. Yeah. If you look at most of those tech companies that are built there, they're built by Europeans and Asians. Our schools are by far the best. If you look at what ETH pulls off with like very little money,
that's insane.
It's just kind of insane.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is structural, right? It's about culture. It's about how we fund things. And it's a little bit like seeing your teenage kid sort of, go vaping and sit in the corner with a hoodie, right? Which is really sad because it doesn't have to be that way, right? Yeah. And it's many things. It's the risk-taking bit where people will pick something that's less risky over something that's more risky, where the outliers are at the time, like organizing the world's information, making it universally accessible, which was Google's mission, felt very adventurous, right? Yeah. But it's really the outliers that you need to look for. It's the ecosystem here. I see a lot of founders getting really bad advice from people and just making bad decisions, not because they are stupid, but because people are telling them things that they shouldn't be doing. There's a lack of capital for certain early stage things. People are trying to optimize the economics very early. They're near-term greedy, not long-term greedy, right?
Yeah. That's usually a bad setup.
That's a really bad setup, yeah. And it's sad because there's no other reason why that should be the case, right? It's hard to get clients here in the early days because they see startup as risky things. I mean, literally most of my customers are still American customers. We still need to land our first Swiss customer. Yeah. Like, that's kind of funny, right?
Oh man, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Or if you look at the government, if you look at sort of the current sessions in the parliament here in Switzerland, I always snicker a bit when they're like, no, we can't invest in the economy. We don't have any money right now. We have the Schuldenbremse, and you're like, Jesus, guys, come on. Right? It's like
Yeah.
Swiss people complaining about not having enough gold. And, I'm worried because if you look at what happened in Germany with the car industry, this could happen to industries that are quite important to our GDP. And at the end of the day, I do think Europe and the way that we live here is something that's worth protecting, but we need to produce revenue in order to do that. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few really important points, right? We have great talent here in Europe, including Switzerland, obviously, but there's a lack of ambition or thinking big. There's a lack of capital being deployed. There's bad advice. Are these things fixable? And if yes, how?
I think they are, and I would say Switzerland is almost uniquely positioned here. And it's funny, having been poking around at sort of policy for a little bit, I kind of realized Zurich might actually be the solution for Europe. So we have ETH, which is by any stretch of the imagination one of the best schools in the world, and it produces way more people than we could absorb in the Zurich area. So that's great. It has really good terms for people that spin out. If you compare it to, the country I'm from, the Netherlands, we don't drown people with broken cap tables on day one. I think we can do a little bit more with like focused research organizations. So we could allow people a little bit more leeway to try more crazy things also in college, right? Wealthy people in Switzerland, go pay that and stop putting your money in random hedge fund stuff, right? It's like the future generation. Sorry for a commercial break, right?
Of course.
So that's one. I think the second thing is Europe has gotten really complicated for people to operate a company. And the cool thing about Switzerland is that the government functions really well and you can do things relatively fast if you just call them. So that's cool. I think thirdly, Switzerland did a weird thing. It Zurich is a scale-up ecosystem for American startups, which is kind of funny, right? Like we have Google, we have Facebook, we have IBM, and so they've been very good at like getting those people out. The question now is how do we get them to build more companies, right? And that's, it's about incentives. It's about making sure that, people can try stuff. It's making sure we have good investors. So a few concrete ideas. One, get a few anchor VCs from like the Sequoias, the General Catalysts. The Index is actually a Swiss VC originally.
Geneva, right?
In Geneva. I think Neil's still there. Neil, if you're listening, come to Zurich. But having local VCs here, what that will do is term sheets will get more favorable for founders. That ultimately means all the weirdos get smoked out. And that will lift the ecosystem. Problem is all of this stuff is like trains, right? It takes forever to do that well. So that's one. Second, I think what ETH is doing around entrepreneurship is awesome. It's like league of its own. We should just throw more money at that, right? More people should try things, and that should be a completely normal path for people to go after, right? Focus research organizations. So, pick 4 themes. We want to win in robotics because we have like cool robotics companies. We really want to win in pharma. So like pick a few industries and be like, okay, we're just going to go get the best Americans, pay them a shit ton of money, give them a visa, come here, right? Or go to EPFL, that's fine too, but whatever, somewhere in Switzerland, right? Have them build a company and we can do that, right? Like we have agency to do that here. And then lastly, if there's a way in which we can get all the people that are very comfy at Google and Facebook, like I was, to go, not sell ads and do something else, that'd be awfully nice. Like, for example, we have some of the best vision models being developed in Zurich, right? Mm-hmm. Like Apple's camera AI is mostly out of Zurich, right? Yeah. Disney's 3D stuff is mostly out of Zurich. Facebook's like Oculus and 3D, we should win in robots, right? We should win in navigating spaces, understanding spaces, and that kind of stuff. And so more companies, like Antibiotics and those types of things, we should put serious money in and actually try to win. Anyway, culturally, that is tricky because, we like sort of meeting a lot and everybody gets the same thing. And Switzerland is not a company that likes to invest in outliers unless they're a large bank.
That's true. Yeah. So it is a bit of a mindset problem, a cultural issue to say we want to be number one, because usually we're very happy being the best second, but not the best number one.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, that's true. And I do think this time around is somewhat different, right? So if you look at the major technologies of the last, let's say, 2 decades, it was web, obviously. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people benefited from that. But then it was like social, net new. mobile, net new; big data, net new. A lot of technologies were net new technologies. AI is not, right? AI eats existing industries, right? And so, there's just a question of, do we want to be the big open air elderly care home museum that manages people's money, or keep running towards the front? I think we're doing a lot better than the rest of Europe, but I think there could be a 10x in there. I don't see why we couldn't be what London is right now.
Yeah, that's not the benchmark, right? Just because Europe is doing worse than Switzerland, it doesn't mean that we're doing well.
It's like the other 15-year-old that's vaping too, right?
Exactly.
That's not the bar. Yeah, exactly.
And if you look at your case, I love that you moved back to Europe, that you're operating out of Switzerland and also Amsterdam, etc. But like, you are here in Switzerland, and that you're so vocal about the things that need to change, and you're bullish on Europe, especially Switzerland. But at the same time, we look at your cap table, we look at your customer base, right? It's heavily US centric.
Yep.
So isn't that a bit of a contradiction?
I mean, it is in terms of reality. It isn't in terms of ambition, right? So I would love for, so like I said before, I think I'm privileged. And if we become, $1 billion company, that's mostly because we had a better network. We had a whole bunch of other things that are just, Americans call it, we had an unfair advantage, right?
Yeah.
And I would like other people to have unfair advantages, right? Because, it's going to be fun if Cradle gets bigger, but, I'd love to have 15 others, because that creates a bigger ecosystem. It creates more mobility between people moving between companies. It creates more ideas. Ultimately, this all feeds on each other, right? So I don't think it's a contradiction. It's something I want for a lot more people. Mm-hmm. I would also argue some of the decisions that we've made are just smart decisions, as in, you should, as a founder in Switzerland, go to the US right now, because Switzerland's market is just tiny. You're not going to be selling anything here, right? So go to the US right now. If you haven't hired your salesperson there, do it, right? Move there if you have to. Put one of your co-founders there, because it's hard, right? These markets are enormous compared to local markets, and Europe is this sort of patchwork, and it's just harder to build here. That's okay, right? So build it in the US, build it global, right? Build it in the US and here at the same time, right?
Do you ever feel pressure of fully moving to the US at one point?
You mean the holding, or
the holding, the company, the employees, everything basically?
No, I wouldn't do that. So and it depends on your industry, of course. But in our case, global biotech and pharma is roughly 40% US, 40% Europe, 20% rest of the world, and so Europe, US makes sense. We will definitely continue to expand our team in the US. So we have, I think, 8 people there right now. That makes sense, right? I mean, it's just the other market. In terms of, if you look at, for example, talent, capital, those are not issues that we have operating here. There's a lot of stability here, which is very helpful, and I think people will continue to appreciate over the next couple of years. I do think listing is an issue. Like, I would never list on the SME ever.
Yeah.
Right. And I also wouldn't list on the IX, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. You need to list in the US. And the reason is very simple. You have a shareholder agreement. Mm-hmm. Your shareholder agreement says any stock sell needs to be approved by an investor majority. Investors want to get a good price for their stock, and European market depth is so shallow. Like, how is an analyst for the Swiss market index gonna figure out what Cradle's growth is going to be? They have no fucking clue.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
In the US, you have already BlackRock and a whole bunch of these large firms that are trying to figure out what could Cradle be. Yeah. And they have specialized teams that are in AI and life sciences, right? And they're going to float it, and they're going to have their people buy it, and then you're going to get double your price. And so you're going to list there. Yeah. That's just the TLDR, right? So as long as all the local Europeans stop sort of caring about we have our own little stock exchange, everybody's just going to list in the US. There is no way, literally, it's typically in your documents, and none of your investors are going to allow you to do that. Right?
For sure. We recently talked to Jurgi from Sophia Genetics. They also listed on the NASDAQ. Yeah. He said exactly the same.
Yep.
As long as you don't fix the capital markets in Europe, no way you're going to list here.
No, and it's sad because it means that all the proceeds of all the hard work that all of these fun Swiss people are doing here with Cradle is going to go to Americans.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that is a big problem, right? Because we talked about the issues that we have in Europe, but if the money is not flowing back from the proceeds, or at least not to the extent it could, this is hurting this development.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and I think it was Draghi earlier this week said we're a year in. and shit's not happening. And I think that's the TLDR of Europe right now. We're indecisive, we're slow, we don't respond. I think similarly for the Swiss, it's less worrisome because the economy is doing a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I do think at the limit, I find it funny that we're not hitting the accelerator right now with all the things that we have, and we're sort of immobilized by fear a lot.
Yeah. It would even be a huge opportunity to hit full throttle right now when everyone
it's
around
kind of
you is
hilarious.
doing worse.
I think I don't know. Somebody told me if you were to change the Schuldenbremse by like 0.2%, you can deploy like tens of billions of francs. Right? Because this is such an insane amount of money, right? It's like a rounding error. I think like even the Swiss National Bank, which is kind of a weird, interesting national bank, but they're like the largest shareholder in tech in the US.
Yeah, exactly.
But like deploying that money for local Swiss people to do local things, nah, right? We're not going to do that, right? That's risky, right? Which is just stupid.
Yeah. Well, we are basically doing the education. We do the early stage financing, and then when it gets really, really big, the Americans capitalize.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's like you go invest in all this great education. You know, you go train all these people. You go build the proof of principle and concept, and then we're going to go monetize it.
I would just say it's stupid that we don't do it because we leave a lot of potential on the table, and at the same time, we're probably stupid enough that we can allow ourselves to do that.
Yeah, and don't sort of it was pretty recent still, right? In the early 2000s where, we had a lot of the winners, right? So I don't think it's a lot of work to get back to that and be more competitive. But to your point, like political leadership in Europe and globally in general is a little bit weird right now.
Yeah, that's probably a good
maybe
summary.
a nice summary. Yeah.
So let's look into the future and let's focus on you and your company. What is the best case scenario? Where do you see Cradle and success for Cradle in 10 years from now?
Yeah, sure. So, so the master plan is first build software for wealthy biotech and pharma companies that want to make molecules that sort of cure the world. And then really significantly lower the cost that is required to do R&D. So let's say we can get from maybe $100 million to $10 million. We can cut it by 10x. That kind of changes the dynamic because that means like you and your bio friend could go make a molecule, right?
That's insane.
That'd be really fun. So step one is sort of sell it to the rich people. Step two is sort of fund the thing that will make it more accessible to any more enterprise scale-up-y kind of thing. And then broaden out into more categories. So we already have customers like Corteva and AgriScience, right? They don't want to throw small molecule, pesticides on things. They would much rather have things that are way more targeted and can solve very specific pests or other problems, right? You have like food companies, like I'd much rather ferment a lot of food instead of, doing it the other way. There's, this is nylon, right? I'd love to have non-nylon and non-plastic and oil-based products out into the market. McKinsey calculated that about 60% of our global economic inputs could be made with biology. And so, anyway, so step three would be it gets really easy to do that with a small team. And hopefully, and this was really why Jelle sort of joined us in the early days. He was one of the first app developers in the world. And he was like, oh my God, there's like distribution and suddenly you can do this stuff. If we can get to a world where it's like relatively easy to make a molecule, I think we could be at the start, and I hope we're going to be a large contributor to it, but that's still TBD. And then the humans started programming their physical environment, right? That's the thing at the limit, right? Whether we get there, I talk to my investors, bull case, bear case,
of
right?
course, yeah.
Bear cases, lots of very fancy people that are making these products already are going to go somewhat faster, and they're going to be happier with their molecules. The bull case is, we have intelligence already, right? We have biological systems that are way more complex and interesting than others. There was actually an announcement yesterday from Arc Institute, which is one of these focused research organizations in the US. They literally had AI generate the first, not just protein, but bacteriophage, which is an organism. So this is an AI generated organism, right?
Crazy.
A virtual cell, right?
Wow,
that's insane, right?
We live in a very
interesting time. Also very scary in certain cases, but yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I know your ultimate goal is probably to get publicly listed at one point. But
yes.
If you were being bought along the way,
we're not going to get bought.
Just assuming.
Yeah, don't do it.
Who would buy you? Would it be a pharma company? Would it be an AI giant? Who would be the best fit?
I mean, it depends a little bit on how it plays out. So there's definitely interest from pharma to buy companies like ours already because it's just such an obvious thing to be doing, and it's kind of problematic for them as well, right? If your R&D efficiency is like half that of the rest of the industry, you're just going to be dead 10 years from now, right? And so I think again at the limit, the amount of like if you look at all the things you consume and all of your health, it just dwarfs questions that you might have or vacations you might want to go onto and search where that sort of that whole world of physical stuff is just dramatically vaster and larger. And I think that market will just go a lot bigger. Like I'd love to have more hair, right? And not be gray. And, you know, all of these things I think will start to become possible. I think, you know, when we talk about food, right? I think a lot of people would love to be able to just throw sugar and air at something and you get product out of it, right? If farmers can start making precision chemicals, right? In fermenters, like without any harmful side effects, those are things biology can do. It's just really hard. We need to crack that code a bit, right? And so at the limit, I think this can be a lot bigger than other things that are out there today. This is my Silicon Valley coming out.
I love it. We need more of that.
Right. And so the hope is this becomes a major company in Europe that has, hopefully contributes to the Wikipedia page, and then the humans started programming their physical environment. Right. That's what I hope. Yeah. Whether we're going to get there, we'll see. I definitely don't want to sell out. I think a lot of European founders do that way too fast because they like the lifestyle or whatever. Right. Yeah. But honestly, most people that I speak to that sold their company, they're fucking miserable. They're like it's fun to ski in Zermatt for like a few months, and then you're like, meh.
I would even be bored after 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? It's just like, I want to be building, right?
Exactly.
And so, you know, either sell it and do something else because you thought it was not going to be viable or something. But I do think there's too quickly we should celebrate people that make it to the end, which is listing, more than people that sell.
Fully agree.
Yeah. Anyway, you can hopefully not remind me of me saying this several years from now.
We have it on the record now.
Dangles a check in front of my face.
Exactly. Well,
but money. Yeah.
But I love the spirit. That's the way to go about it. That's also this mindset then changes things for Europe to not sell early and let the Americans capitalize and scale it up even higher, but actually building the sort of big companies here.
That's what I would like to see. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would like to see more of that.
So I also have some rapid fire questions for you to wrap up the conversation today. What was the hardest lesson that you've learned as a founder so far?
A few people can only do very few things. And so you have to focus.
Absolutely. What's the biggest mistake when entering the US market?
It's hard to say because that has really been our major market today. So
Fair.
I wouldn't say it's been a big mistake. The biggest mistake for me, I think, is assuming. So Europeans, it's not rapid fire, I'm sorry. Europeans will take a shit ton of time to evaluate you, but they're more loyal. Americans will take a risk and try you, but whether they're going to retain is a bigger question.
Right.
And so if you want to try shit out, try it with Americans. If you want long-term contracts, sell it to Europeans.
Nice one. How do you stay sane as a growth founder?
Oh my God. It's hard. Yeah. I have an insane routine, with exercise, with diet, with, it's sports, right? It's really hard to do well. And you sometimes get really miserable. So I wouldn't say I've cracked it, but, it's funny because I think as a startup, when I talk to other founders, it's either shit doesn't work and you're miserable, or shit works really well and everything falls apart and you're miserable. So it's sort of pick your poison.
It's one or the other stress.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Europe or the US?
Europe.
Zurich or Amsterdam?
Ooh, this one I need to be very careful with.
A very diplomatic Swiss answer.
Europe.
I see.
We're neutral.
I see. Yeah. You're almost Swiss by now. You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was funny. They do ask you about it a lot, right? I think for one award, I got like, do you have a C permit? And like, are you planning to stay here? Like, there's a lot of sort of local pride. And I'm obviously not Swiss. My German is getting there, but my Swiss German... Anyway.
Work in progress.
Yes.
Exactly. Stef, it was so much fun to have you. Thank you so much for your energy and the amazing insights and answers. all the best, and we really, really root for you to get listed.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can build more large Swiss companies, and I hope we can contribute to that. Yeah. And for all the folks at Google, Meta, Apple, and these other places out there, go do something fun.